Okay, now we also have grouped selectors. Grouped selectors are going to be when, let's say that you have multiple different things that you would want all to have the same properties. All right, so for instance, in this case, instead of having three different CSS rules where paragraph is going to be this 555 color, and also a class of trailer is going to be this 555 color, and then maybe this ID of header is going to be, 555. What we could come down here and do is we could comma separate the paragraph selector, the trailer class selector, and the header ID selector, and then just give it all three of those things one declaration block of color 555, right? So that's more efficient. That's referred to as grouping selectors. All right, so let's move on and let's talk about nested selectors. And I want to make sure that you don't get grouped selectors and nested selectors confused. Just remember that grouping selectors is when you're trying to take many separate selectors that have all the exact same properties, and you're trying to just combine them into one rule, where you've got multiple selectors for one set of rules. Whereas nested selectors are different. You can use styling to have a greater level of control by nesting your selectors in an ancestor-descendant relationship. For instance, if you want to link colors, on a page to be green, except for maybe inside of a class that's called special where links need to be pink, it might look something like this. And let's look at this table here and let's talk about what we've got. So if you look up here where it says normal A, that'd be like a normal anchor link. So if you look down, that would be the normal anchor link instance. Whereas if you looked at an A tag that was inside of a special class, that would be this second vertical column. So let's look at how we've got this. On the left, we can look at the way that the HTML view for each of those would be set up. So under the normal A, we would have something, let's say an anchor link inside of a paragraph tag, for instance, and it would just be, href equals link.html, and then the actual clickable text here is capital in all caps is the word link. All right, same is true for the special class, except that now you see that the ancestor of A, which is P, in fact, in this case, A is the child and P is the parent, but it also works with ancestors and descendants where you have multiply nested things. But let's say that you've got just an A class right now inside of a P tag, and the P tag has a class of special on it. Okay, so let's say that we want anything that has the class of special, we want all the links inside of that special class to be a different color. So the way that then we would write our CSS would be, instead of, which is what we have on the left, instead of having just an anchor selector, an A tag selector, we have, for the normal anchor selector, we have color light green, and there's no text decoration, right? Meaning there's no underlining. But on the right side, if you look at this nested selector rule, we have an instance of an A tag inside of a special class. And any instance of A tag that is found inside of a special class is going to get separate and different treatment. It's going to be fuchsia, and this time we do want text decoration. We do want it to be underlined. And so in the way that you can look at nested selectors whenever you're writing them or whenever you're reading something that someone else wrote, is that you always kind of can think of it. I think it's easier to start at the end, like on the right side, and move to the left. Like, so you want to start at the end and move backwards because you're trying to see what the ancestry of that descendant is. So in this case, we would look at this anchor tag and we'd say, all right, any instance of an anchor tag inside of a special class is going to have the following properties and values, okay? And then this is the way it would actually display down at the bottom, is the way it would display in a browser's viewport. So the normal A, you see, has no underline and it's green, just like the rule says up here, right? Just like the HTML is indicating. And then over here on the right, you see that this is the example of the special class where this anchor link was embedded in the HTML, or it was nested in the HTML inside of a paragraph tag whose class was special, right? And then with the way the CSS is written, you see that it shows up as fuchsia with an underline in the display viewport, okay? Okay, let's look at CSS properties that deal with long format versus shorthand. So it's referred to as long format or longhand versus shorthand. So CSS rules can be written in either longhand or shorthand. And you know, shorthand is a little bit more confusing at first to look at, but one of the things that I'm probably going to be doing in this class is I'm going to be using a lot of shorthand, and I want to teach you shorthand up front, because even though at the beginning it might be slightly more confusing, not very much more, but slightly more confusing than maybe writing things out in longhand, the benefit is that once you learn shorthand first, it's a whole lot easier to learn it in that order. If you learn the longhand way of writing things first, I find that it's harder for students to then go backwards and learn the shorthand version. So, you know, either way, but the thing is, I want you to understand that there are two separate ways of writing CSS, and neither one of them is necessarily the right way or the wrong way. They're just different. One's more efficient than the other. If you look here at our examples, on the right side we have the long version, the long format. And then in this example, we are trying to style a paragraph tag where we're giving it a margin all the way around. And if you see here, the longhand would be margin dash top, and then we're putting 1 pixel at the top of it, margin dash right 2 pixels, margin dash bottom 3 pixels, margin dash left is 4 pixels. That's longhand. And you can see how if you had an entire style sheet of all longhand, how it would get to be very encumbering and very long and heavy, you know. Whereas if you look at the left hand over here side where we have the shorthand, this is a lot simpler to look at, and the trick is you're going to learn the order in which these values come. And the best way to think of this is like looking at a clock and looking at the way that a clock's hand will turn. So it's going to turn clockwise, right? We're all used to talking about things in terms of clockwise or counterclockwise. Well, just remember that when you're writing the rules for shorthand, like with margins and with padding, okay, then it's going to go clockwise. So in this example, you can see that it's going to start at the top, just like a clock, at the 12 o'clock position. And so we've got 1 pixel for the top, and then on the next value, we've got, if the clock hand were to move to the right to the 3 o'clock position, we'd have 2 pixels, okay, for the right side. And then for the bottom, which would be, you know, the 6 o'clock position, right, that would be 3 pixels for the bottom margin. And then the clock keeps moving to the left, right, and then it's going to be at the 9 o'clock position. All right, just think of that clock hand turning. All right, so the left margin is going to be 4 pixels, and that's an easy way to remember, for instance, the way that your margin shorthand or your padding shorthand would be. Okay. This is just an example, though. There are lots of other ways of writing shorthand. All right, now I want to talk a minute about units of measure. All right, while there seems like there are limitless values you can assign to properties, we're just going to focus now on units. Later, we'll talk about the range of other property values. But I'm going to address the difference between absolute and relative units. Those are two pretty major categories of units. And the most obvious absolute unit of measure would be pixels, okay? Because pixels occupy a certain amount of space that are fixed and determined and defined on a screen as part of the screen's resolution. And they don't change in the same way that, like, say, in the real world outside of a computer, that inches and centimeters don't change, right? Those are fixed units of measure. Well, relative units are going to be opposite of that. They're ones that are relative to the environment around them or to the content around them. And examples would be like percentages, and in some case, M's. An M unit it's pronounced M, but it's EM if you're writing it out. An M unit of measure measures the width of the letter M of that typography that you're using. Since M is typically the most, it's usually the widest of all of the letters in the letter forms. of a typeface. Anyway, so as I just said, M's are the most commonly assigned unit of measure for typography. And if you look down, but there are the other ways of doing it too. But then if we're talking about layout positioning units, then a lot of times you can use pixels, which means that you're going to have a fixed dimension. And that's okay, but nowadays with responsive design, a lot of times it's a little bit more preferable sometimes to use percentages or, you know, like fluid types of layout units of measure, because that gives it the ability to flex based on the size of the screen that you're looking at.